Hello and welcome to Pirate Slug Stories, the place where forgotten pirate legends rise from the deep. In today's tale, we will be diving into the strange voyage of a pirate captain who found a harpoon that could wound the moon itself, and learned too late that some treasures are not hidden to be found, but sealed away so the sea can keep breathing. In the year 1698, when port lords ruled the harbors with ledgers sharper than knives, the pirate sloop Grey Morrow lay trapped near the pale reefs of Waning Key. No wind touched her sails, no tide lifted her keel. The sea around the reef had gone flat and white, like milk poured over glass. Coral teeth rose from the water in long, crooked rows, and every rope aboard the Grey Morrow hung limp as if the ship had been dead for a week. Captain Orla Vane stood at the bow with one boot on the rail and one hand on the worn brass buckle of her coat. She was not a captain given to prayers, omens, or drunken songs about lucky stars. Orla trusted good rope, sharp steel, full barrels, and honest work when she could find it. But there was no honest work waiting for her in the port of St. Cradle, only debt. Only the port lord Garrick Sallow with his private gallows and his red book of names. Orla's crew owed him more coin than they could steal in a year. If they returned empty-handed, the Grey Morrow would be seized, her crew sold into chain labor, and Orla herself would hang from the harbor tower as a warning to every captain who signed a bad bargain. So when the old reef pilot, Hob Turn, whispered of Waning Key and the Moon-Harpoon, Orla listened. She did not believe him, but she listened. The harpoon is black iron, Hob had said, crouched beside the galley lantern while the crew pretended not to hear. Long as a man. Cold as a drowned bell. They say it struck the moon's reflection centuries ago and pinned open a sea gate under the reef. A sea gate to what? Asked Orla. Hob's left eye twitched. To a vault no tide can drown. That was enough for the crew. Men and women who had faced cannon fire without blinking began crossing themselves, muttering charms and avoiding the moonless water beyond the hull. But Orla heard only one thing: a vault, a way to pay Sallow, a way to buy her crew free. Now in the breathless dark before dawn, the Grey Morrow creaked against a reef that glowed faintly beneath the water. There was no moon in the sky, only a great black emptiness where moonlight should have been. The lookout called down from the mast, his voice thin. "Captain, something's moving on the reef." Orla lifted her spyglass. At first she saw only the pale coral, slick with weed and shining with trapped salt. Then the water drew back. Though no tide had changed, it peeled away from the reef in a slow, unnatural breath, exposing a field of bones. Whale bones. Great ribs arched from the coral like the remains of a cathedral. A skull large enough to hold a jolly boat lay wedged between stones, its empty eye sockets filled with silver crabs. The creature must have died there long ago, yet no barnacles clung to it. No rot darkened it. The bones looked polished, almost tended. Then something black rose from the whale's spine. Not floated. Rose. The crew fell silent as a harpoon pushed itself free from the dead bones with a wet metallic groan. It was longer than any whaler's iron Orla had ever seen, forged from black metal that drank the lantern glow. Its barbed head was shaped not like a spear point, but like a hooked crescent. Around its shaft ran shallow grooves filled with pale silver light, though there was no moon to feed them. The harpoon turned in the air, slowly, deliberately, and pointed straight up at the empty sky. The cook dropped a tin cup. It struck the deck once and rolled to Orla's boot. "No treasure is worth that," he whispered. Orla did not answer. A thin sound came from the reef, like a nail being pulled from old wood. The water shivered. Far below the flat white surface, something enormous shifted. Hob Turn backed away until his shoulders hit the mainmast. "It has woken because we looked," he said. Orla turned on him. "You told me the harpoon opened the way to treasure." "I told you the legend," Hob said. "Legends forget the parts that get men killed." A murmur spread through the crew. Fear moved faster than fire aboard a trapped ship. Orla knew that sound. She had heard it before mutinies, before men jumped overboard in storms, before desperate crews chose one death because another seemed worse. She climbed onto the rail. "Listen to me," she said. The muttering faded. "We are 3 days from St. Cradle with no wind. Half a barrel of water and Garrick Sallow waiting with chains. That reef holds something, or it would not have guarded itself so well. I will not force any hand to follow me onto it, but if there is a vault beneath Waning Key, I mean to find it." Her first mate, Bram Kroll, a square-built sailor with storm scars across both hands, looked from Orla to the reef. "And if that black iron thing is bait," Orla met his eyes. "Then we take the bait carefully." A few nervous laughs broke the spell, not many but enough. They lowered a skiff into water that felt too still for any sea. Orla took Bram Hob and 2 deckhands with boat hooks. No one sang as they rowed. The oars dipped without splashing, as if the water swallowed sound. When they reached the exposed bones, Orla stepped onto the reef. The coral was cold through her boot leather. The harpoon hung above the whale's spine at chest height, turning just enough to follow her as she approached. Its crescent head still pointed upward toward the place where the moon should have been. Orla reached out. Hob grabbed her wrist. "Captain, the story says the Moon-Harpoon never misses, but it never strikes flesh. It strikes what something loves most." Orla looked at his hand until he released her. "My crew loves freedom," she said. "If this thing can find it, I'll risk the cut." She wrapped both hands around the black iron shaft. The cold entered her palms like seawater flooding a hold. The harpoon dropped into her grip with a weight that nearly pulled her to one knee. At once, the grooves along the iron brightened. A thread of silver light stretched from the barbed crescent to the sky, though the sky remained moonless. Then the harpoon pulled, not toward the reef, not toward the bones, upward. Orla's boots scraped coral as the weapon dragged her arms above her head. Bram seized her belt and hauled back. "Let go." "I can't." The silver thread tightened. High above them, where nothing had been, a faint round outline appeared in the black sky. Not the moon itself, but the memory of it. A pale circle, thin as breath on glass. The harpoon jerked. A shard of light tore loose from that ghostly circle and ran down the silver thread into the weapon. The world dimmed. A cry rose from the gray morrow. Every lantern aboard the ship shrank to a blue pinprick. The pale reef darkened. The horizon vanished. Even the stars seemed to flinch away. Beneath Orla's boots, the whale bones rattled. A sound rolled up from under the reef. Deep, slow, alive. It was not a roar, it was a waking breath. The water around Waning Key bulged upward in a great smooth dome. Silver eyes opened beneath the surface, each one wider than a sail. One then another, all staring up through the dead calm sea. The deckhand nearest the skiff sobbed. Bram whispered, "What is that?" Hob's face had gone the color of ash. The reef's old jailer. The harpoon twisted in Orla's hands and pointed no longer at the sky. It aimed at the water, at the eyes. A line of silver light ran from the weapon's crescent point down through the reef, revealing something impossible below, a vast circular door set into the seabed, made of stone darker than night, crossed with black iron bands. At its center was a hole shaped exactly like the harpoon's shaft, not a vault door waiting to be opened. A seal. The harpoon shuddered, eager to fly into Orla's grasp or out of it. The silver-eyed shape below pressed against the stone from the other side, and cracks glimmered along the ancient bands. Orla understood then. The Moon-Harpoon had not been made to hunt whales. It had not been made to lead pirates to gold. It had pierced the moon's reflection and stolen enough light to pin shut a gate beneath Waning Key. Every pull did not reveal the treasure. Every pull loosened the nail. On the gray morrow, the crew shouted as the water began to rise around the hull without tide or wind. The sloop groaned against the reef. The lanterns burned dimmer. Above, the pale outline of the moon flickered like a dying coal. The harpoon dragged Orla one step toward the edge, then another. Below the surface, the silver eyes widened, and from behind the sealed gate under the sea, something tapped back. The tapping beneath the sea grew louder. It was not a knock from a creature begging to be freed. It was a warning. 3 slow strikes against the sealed gate, each one rising through the water. Through the reef, through the bones of the gray morrow. Orla Dane stood at the rail with both hands locked around the Moon-Harpoon. Its silver head shivered like a living thing. The rope tied to it had gone stiff, pulling toward the reflection of the moon trembling on the black water below. "Captain," whispered Tavin, her first mate, "that gate is opening." "No," Orla said, though she was not sure if she believed it. "Something wants us to think it is." The sea around Waning Key lifted in a perfect circle. No storm wind pushed it. No tide commanded it. The water simply rose, climbing higher than the reef, higher than the ship's waist, forming a shining wall around the sloop. Inside that wall, the gray morrow sat trapped like a fly in a glass bottle. Then a cannon fired from the dark. The shot struck the reef ahead of them and burst coral into white shards. Out of the mist slid the Iron Vulture, a lean black brig with torn red sails and a bowsprit carved like a hooked claw. Lanterns burned along her deck. Men moved like shadows behind the guns. Captain Narek Vale stood on the forward rail, one hand on a brass speaking horn. Orla Dane, he called, you have something that does not belong in poor hands. Tavin spat over the side. He followed us. He followed the harpoon, Orla said. The Moon-Harpoon pulled harder, dragging her boots across the wet planks. 3 crewmen rushed forward and caught the shaft with her, but the weapon bucked in their hands. Narek laughed across the water. Do not fight it. Aim it at the moon's face and let it bite. One throw, Captain, one throw and the gate opens. Every pearl tower beneath this key will be ours. The silver eyes below the surface rose again. A vast shape turned beneath the gray marrow, not attacking, not circling for prey, shielding the gate with its wounded body. Orla saw scars across the creature's back, pale lines glowing in the water. Harpoon marks, old ones, new ones, dozens of them. The beast opened one silver eye, and in that eye Orla saw the truth as clearly as if it had been written in fire. The Moon-Harpoon had never been a key. It was a nail. Each time some greedy captain cast it into the moon's reflection, the harpoon struck the heart of the tide below. Each wound loosened the gate. Each wound weakened the guardian that held the sea in balance. The Pearl City was no city of treasure. It was a prison built around the living heart that pulled the tides around the world. If the gate opened, the tide would no longer rise and fall. It would run wild. Ships would be lifted into clouds. Islands would drown before supper. Harbors would empty into mud. The sea itself would forget its own law. Orla's throat tight. Her crew owed more than coin. In Port Mercy, debt chains waited for them. The Grey Morrow had sailed to Waning Key because one great prize could buy every name free. No more hiding, no more running, no more choosing between bread and powder. Tavin saw her face and understood. If there is treasure down there, he said quietly, it could save us. Orla looked at her crew. At Sen the cook clutching a boarding axe with flour still on his sleeve. At Little Bram up in the rigging, pale as candle wax. At Maeve the gunner, bleeding from the brow but standing firm beside her cannon. They were frightened. They were waiting for her to choose. Narek Vale raised his sword. Take aim, he shouted. The Iron Vulture's guns rolled out. Orla lifted the harpoon. The moment its silver point faced the moonlit water, the wall of sea bright. Far below, beyond the Guardian's huge shadow, something opened like an eye of pearl. Towers shimmered beneath the waves. Domes, bridges, streets of pale stone. A drowned wonder beyond any tale, her crew gasped. Even Orla felt her heart reach for it. Then the Leviathan groaned. Not a roar, not a threat, pain. The sound passed through the ship and made every nail tremble. The Moon-Harpoon heated in Orla's hands. The old scars on the creature's back flared one by one, and the gate below widened another inch. Narek's longboat hit the water. He and 6 men rowed hard toward the Grey Morrow, hooks ready, blades drawn. The Iron Vulture fired again. A cannonball tore through the Grey Morrow's stern rail and sent splinters across the deck. Captain, Maeve cried, give the word. Orla looked once more at the pearl glow beneath the sea. Freedom for her crew waited down there, but so did ruin for everyone else. She turned the Moon-Harpoon away from the moon. The weapon screamed. It was a thin metal sound that drove men to their knees. The sea wall shook. Narek's boat lurched as waves slapped its sides. What are you doing? Narek shouted. That is a king's fortune. No, Orla called back. It is a wound with a shine on it. She ran across the deck. The harpoon fought her every step, dragging toward the water, toward the moon, toward the gate it had been forged to open. Tavin grabbed the shaft behind her, then Maeve, then Sen. One by one, the crew of the Grey Morrow threw their weight against the curse. Where do we aim? Tavin shouted. Orla looked up at the main mast. The mast was old heartwood, blackened by storms, patched with iron bands, carved with the crew's marks from years of voyages. It was the spine of the Grey Morrow, the thing that held their sails, the thing that had carried them through hunger, pursuit, and war-black weather. If the harpoon needed a heart to bite, Orla would give it the ships instead of the seas. With me, she cried. They drove the Moon-Harpoon into the mast. The silver point struck wood. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the entire ship blazed with moonlight. The mast cracked from deck to top. Silver fire raced along the rigging. Every sail snapped open, though there was no wind. The rope tied to the harpoon burned away in a shower of sparks, and a deep note rang from beneath the sea like a bell struck in a drowned cathedral. The water wall collapsed outward. Narek's longboat spun helplessly. His men screamed as the sudden tide hurled them away from the Grey Morrow and slammed them into the reef shallows. The Iron Vulture tried to turn, but the sea beneath her dropped without warning, leaving her keel grinding on coral. Her masts leaned, her red sails sagged. No, Narek cried, waist deep in foaming water. "You fool, you broke the key." Orla gripped the split mast as silver light poured into it from the harpoon. "No," she said, "I returned the nail." Below, the Leviathan rose. Its enormous back broke the surface, dark as midnight stone, streaked with glowing scars that now faded one by one. The Moon-Harpoon dissolved into the mast, not melting like metal, but sinking like a bad memory into old wood. The crack in the main mast sealed with a long silver scar. The gate beneath Waning Key closed. The Pearl City vanished. The sea settled. For the first time that night, the moon's reflection lay whole upon the water. Narek Vale crawled onto a strip of reef, soaked and shaking, his hat gone, his sword lost. Around him, broken crates from his own ship bobbed in the foam. Not gold, not pearls, only chains, diving hooks, and iron cages meant for whatever he expected to drag from below. The Leviathan turned one silver eye toward him. Narek did not move. No one on the gray morrow spoke. The Guardian lowered its great head until its eye was level with Orla at the rail. In that shining gaze, she saw no thanks that could be put into words. Only the pull of deep tides, the patience of ancient things, and the mercy of something powerful enough to destroy them all but choosing not to. Then the creature sank. As it disappeared, a single object floated up beside the hull. Not a chest, not a crown. A pearl the size of a robin's egg, dull and plain, except for one silver line through its center, like the scar now sealed in the gray morrow's mast. Graham hauled it aboard in a net. Tavin held it to the lantern. "Will it pay our debt?" Orla took the pearl and closed her fist around it. "Maybe not all of it." The crew stared at the damaged mast, the torn rail, the soaked deck, the empty sea where a treasure beyond dreams had vanished. Sen gave a tired laugh. "Then we are still poor." Orla looked at the moon shining clean over Waning Key. "No," she said, "we are still free. There is a difference." By dawn, the iron vulture sat broken on the reef, and Narek Vale was left with enough rope to mend his pride and little else. Orla gave him water, a compass, and no apology. The gray morrow limped away from Waning Key under patched canvas. Her mast held firm, though a silver scar curled down its length and glowed whenever the tide changed. Sailors who saw it in later years swore the ship always knew when waters were safe and when the sea wished to be left alone. As for the little pearl, it bought less freedom than Orla had hoped, but more time than the crew expected. And sometimes, time is the first coin of every escape. They sailed west with empty pockets, full hearts, and a ship that creaked like it was quietly laughing. Behind them, Waning Key faded into morning mist. And from that day on, whenever the moon shone whole on the water, the crew of the gray morrow lowered their voices, for they knew the tide had a heart, and it remembered who chose not to pierce it.